Yay! Oh my God! Holy shit! Wait, there's actually a lot of people here. Hi! Oh my God! Wow! I love this. I'm so happy. I'm so excited. Hello, hello. I'm like actually so lit about this. You have no idea. Hi.
Hey.
Oh wow. Okay, 198 participants. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. That's
I
exciting.
didn't know that you could have that many people
I didn't either. I'm
on
kind
a
of
Zoom
terrified.
successfully. Ah.
Okay, well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our Faraway Friends Zoom. It makes me really happy to see this many people, wow, participating in these campaigns, fighting for civil rights and stuff. We're going to talk about a lot of really important things. So this is a safe space, of course. We encourage respect and kindness within the Zoom comments, everyone. So be nice, babies. I love you. So we are here on one of the last nights of Pride to honor the decades of activism that led to monumental moments like marriage equality and securing non-discrimination protections in housing and employment. Pride started as a protest against the mistreatment of LGBTQ people by the police and society in general, and this June we've seen protests that focus on the need to create just systems for Black and Brown people across America. And this Pride, it has become more important than ever that we use our voices to affirm this truth, that Black Lives Matter and Black queer lives matter all year round. So it's really important that we are still educating ourselves and voting and contacting our representatives to keep them accountable and supporting Black and Brown LGBTQ organizations and protesting on the front lines to uplift the voices of the unheard, I guess, like to make sure we're, not centering ourselves in this. So this is really essential work, and I'm really proud to amplify important voices with my platform and my art. So yeah, I'm really excited. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Nora Huppert from Lambda Legal and Mark and Nazarena from the Ruth Ellis Center in Detroit are joining me on this call. And although these organizations both work to support LGBTQ people, they both do it in different ways. Lambda Legal is an advocacy organization, meaning they fight for the just treatment of LGBTQ people across the country and advocating for human rights everywhere. So thank you so much for coming onto our Zoom call and taking your time to educate us on ways we can positively help change the US. So Nora, can you please tell us your pronouns and explain why asking a person's pronouns are important? And could you tell us a little more about Lambda Legal and what you think is the most important issue you're working on?
I would love to, and thank you so much for having us on and having this opportunity to talk about the ways that we can show up for the community right now. My name is Nora Huppert. My pronouns are she, her, or whatever you like. I am an attorney at Lambda Legal. I think, asking people's pronouns as a practice can be a really powerful, strong signal to trans people in any given space or community that is a safe and supportive place for them. The thing that I always say, the caution that I always give is that sometimes the willingness to ask people's pronouns turns into a way to single people out. As someone who has had lives a very sort of weirdly gendered experience, I've had the experience in certain spaces of people wanting to be supportive, but then it's a question that they ask you to sort of figure out what your deal is. So I think the best policy is to have something that is universally and consistently applied. To tell you a little bit about Lambda Legal, we are the oldest and largest national legal organization whose mission is to achieve full recognition of the civil rights of lesbians, gay men, bisexuals, transgender people, and everyone living with HIV through impact litigation, education, and public policy work. What that means in plain English is we work mostly in court. suing people. Right now, it's often governments, often the Trump administration, to fight for the rights of LGBTQ people and people living with HIV. And to give you just sort of a taste of the most important thing that I'm working on and have worked on, I think nearest and dearest to my heart at Lambda is our cases against anti-LGBTQ curriculum laws, which are laws in states that are homophobic or otherwise anti-LGBTQ laws about what teachers can or can't teach in the classroom. So for example, in 2019, we sued the state of Arizona over their law, which made it illegal for teachers in certain contexts to use curriculum that promotes a homosexual lifestyle or portrays homosexuality as a positive alternative lifestyle. We won in that case when the state of Arizona quickly decided to repeal that law rather than fight us in court. And then earlier this year in 2020, we followed that up in one of the first cases that I worked on at Lambda Legal by suing South Carolina over its state law that said the program of instruction provided for may not include a discussion of alternative sexual lifestyles from heterosexual relationships, including but not limited to homosexual relationships. And we also won that case in what's called a consent decree, in which that law was agreed to be unconstitutional and is not being enforced in South Carolina.
Wow, that's incredible. Geez, that must be a mouthful for you to say and explain. Wow. That's a lot of really important work. So thank you so much for explaining. It's really incredible to hear that sort of work is really happening and still continuing to be funded and spread and talked about everywhere. So Mark and Nazarena, is that how I pronounce it? I think that's correct.
That sounds beautiful. Thank you.
I just wanted to make sure. From the Ruth Ellis Center are joining us. So the Ruth Ellis Center is a wonderful community center that's actually really, really close to my house, like a 40-minute drive. Because I live in like the Metro Detroit area. So it's really nice that I get to talk to people so close. So if you guys could tell us your pronouns and talk about what the Ruth Ellis Center does and what you think is the most vital part of your work, I would really love to hear it.
Nas, you want to start?
Sure. So I'm Nazarena Makasege Minaya. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And in terms of the work that we do, we provide space. We provide a safe and a brave environment for LGBTQ young people to love themselves. Love brought me to Michigan, and the love of the center and the young people that we serve and work with is what keeps me in Michigan. What about you, Mark?
Yeah, so Mark Irwin McCormick, I'm the Director of Development and Advancement at Ruth Ellis Center, he, him, and his pronouns. Ruth Ellis Center was established because 21 years ago, there were very few spaces for LGBTQ plus young people, especially LGBTQ plus young people of color, to go and be celebrated. It started because there was a young person who was 15 and was experiencing homelessness due to family rejection. And the community got together and stepped up to support this young person and the hundreds, thousands of LGBTQ nationwide who were also experiencing this kind of rejection. So we started with the drop-in center. Since then, we've added a full clinic offering integrated primary and behavioral health care. We have a family preservation program. We have Bruce House, which is our residential foster care facility. We have a street outreach program. We have the Ruth Ellis Institute, which is the training arm of the organization. So we are training other agencies and child welfare professionals nationwide on how to best serve LGBTQ plus young people in their own communities. So again, it started, as Naz said, as a safe space to celebrate LGBTQ young people and to identify resources that they were seeking. And it has since grown into this really multifaceted organization addressing lots of areas of need that LGBTQ young people have identified in their own lives. And it's a pretty extraordinary space, as Naz mentioned. And I'm just honored to be a part of the work.
And we work really hard to make sure there's as few barriers as possible for the young people to access us. And Mark spoke briefly about our health and wellness center and the care that's provided there. It's fully integrated with behavioral health. So you could potentially see your therapist and your primary care provider, your doctor, in the same span of a couple of hours, and your care there, as well as your prescriptions and gender affirming care, even hormones, are free for all the young people that we serve. And that spans from ages from 13 to 30. So all of those wonderful young people are able to come to us and not have to worry about the cost for their care. And that's probably, I won't say it's the most vital. I'll never put a value judgment just because I love all aspects of the work that we do, but it's definitely something that I personally am amazed by. And I'm so happy for our youth that they're able to experience that in such a loving environment.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's really, really important. It's great to hear that there's so many areas in your work that you love that you couldn't even pick one that is exactly the most important for everything. Yeah, that's very important. I'd like to encourage everyone in the chat, by the way, to think of questions for our panel, because we'll have a time for a Q&A at the end of the call. So I think there's like a little feature. I'm like awful at Zoom, so I don't really know how this works, but there's a Q&A feature, I believe. So we want you to be a part of the discussion. So please be sure to chat with your fellow friends in the chat room. So I have some questions for the panelists now. So Nora, there seems to be a progress all around us. The Supreme Court recently ruled that you can't be fired for being gay, and shows like Pose and Queer Eye and stuff are some of the most watched in the US and the world. So with all of this progress, why do we need an organization like Lambda Legal?
That is such a great question, and it's something that I think about all the time. I think there are a few reasons why some of our biggest successes at the national level and the federal level as a movement haven't gone as far as we would like to sort of liberate all of our community. I think one reason is that often having legal rights on paper doesn't mean as much if they can't be enforced and realized. There is the recent Supreme Court ruling of just a couple weeks ago, which held that LGBTQ people were covered under federal workplace civil rights laws. But there are a whole host of ways in which that right won't be realized for all of us without action. For example, we're seeing signs that many employers are going to try to double down on the argument that their religious beliefs mean that they don't have to follow the civil rights laws. And that's something that we'll have to fight and strategize around in court. Another reason is that the legal system is just not always well designed to fully realize civil rights protections. People who don't have resources, people who are facing systemic discrimination, people who just don't have access to the legal system for a variety of different reasons. Federal civil rights laws won't fully protect them unless we're really, really vigilant about it. And even then, we have to look to other solutions to realize true justice. I think another reason is that the recent Supreme Court ruling, for now, only explicitly protects us in certain contexts, and only at the level of federal law. For example, only 3 days before the decision came down, the Trump administration finalized its decision to roll back the healthcare protections for trans people that came in with Obamacare. That's what's referred to as Section 1557. Now, Lambda Legal has already sued the Trump administration over that decision, and that case has only recently been filed. But it's an example of how getting legal protections in one area doesn't always translate to having justice in all areas or for all of us. And I think healthcare is going to be a particularly strong example of that in the years to come. Finally, there are state legislatures which aren't affected as much by federal law, except in very specific ways. And a big fight for us as a community this past year has been the wave of anti-trans bills in state legislatures. And really the worst of those bills have targeted trans youth have targeted the provision of medical care to trans kids, for example. And that's something that, you know, successes at the national level or the cultural level don't always take care of that sort of wave of transphobia that is happening in certain state legislatures in this country.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you so much. Mark and Naz, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the role LGBTQ orgs play in 2020. I'm also curious about what leads youth to Ruth Ellis Center and what factors contribute to LGBTQ youth making up a disproportionately large number of the population of youth suffering from homelessness.
Absolutely. Naz, you want me to take this one? Do you want me to take this one, Naz? Can you hear me? I'll get started, and Naz, you can chime in. So I would say the role LGBTQ plus specific organizations play right now is really listening to their communities. What are the needs in those communities? And as Nora was just talking about, while we've made significant progress in terms of marriage equality and discrimination in terms of employment, I can tell you that none of the young people at Ruth Ellis Center are benefiting from these things, right? So Black and brown LGBTQ plus youth who don't have access to resources, if they were to encounter employment discrimination, how are they going to get legal counsel, right? They don't have access to those kinds of things. And so, you know, I start to really think about what is the litmus test for us as LGBTQ organizations. And if the progress is not impacting some of the most vulnerable of our community, then we're not doing enough work and we're not doing the right work. And so that's really where we stand at Ruth Ellis Center, is we need to be looking at ways in which we can better support Black and brown, especially LGBTQ plus young people in communities nationwide, because they have been left behind in too many cases. Especially, you know, Ruth Ellis Center serves a large population of trans women of color. And I think that the latest research indicates that, you know, the life expectancy for a trans woman of color in the United States is 34, 35. That's a scary statistic. And we've got a lot of work to do. In terms of what LGBTQ youth are facing and why they're disproportionately affected by homelessness, the number one cited reason is due to family rejection. And, you know, Naz and I talk about this a lot with community partners and with individuals who are really interested in learning more about why the center exists. And for so many of the families that we work with, it is this fear, especially for our Black families. You know, a Black mother raising a Black son knows what he's going to face in this country. And if you layer that additional oppression of sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, we know that they are much more likely to experience significant trauma and harm. And so for a lot of families, it is that fear. And while a lot of it is unfounded, we also do recognize that, and we will not demonize families for that. Instead, we'll work with them to help them understand what it is that their young person is going through and how they can better support them so that they can be safe and so that they can be their full authentic self.
Right.
So I hope that answers most of it.
Right. And when you think about it, just like Nora was saying, you know, there are a lot of laws, and if you take it for face value and you're not a lawyer, you think, oh, I'm in there. I'm in a protected group that's been positioned in, you know, in this law. And then you go out into the real world and it's not quite like that. Now, we love, you know, having our health and wellness center, but our health and wellness center, you know, wasn't just sort of born on the fly. We recognized that there was a need. You know, when we went into our drop-in center and we had focus groups with some of the young people we serve, we learned that many of them, I think it was up to 40%, Mark, right, that were living with HIV and not in care. And that was for a variety of reasons. But some of it is you should feel comfortable as a young person to go to your primary care provider and say, I am living with X, Y, and Z, and expect to get the care that you reserve, like you deserve. You deserve to be treated like a human being who's reaching out for support. What does that look like when you walk into your doctor's office and you're being misgendered? You're being called a name that you don't identify with. You're being told that you're a gender that you don't identify with. Are you going to be inclined to be in care, to take care of yourself when you're in a space where you're supposed to be, where you're supposed to be supported, and that's not happening? That's why at least at our center, we have our health and wellness center. And, you know, as much as, you know, like the Ruth Ellis Center, we're based in Detroit, Michigan, we also realize that we can't be everywhere. And because we can't be everywhere, we work really hard. Mark referenced earlier our Ruth Ellis Institute, and our training and evaluation arm is working with entities all over the country to support different systems of care that want to learn what it means to be accessible for LGBTQ young people. But it takes that kind of work, and hopefully positively influencing all of these different systems of care so that, you know, a child in, you know, a LGBTQ child in Detroit, Michigan can have the same experience as a child in Jackson, Mississippi, as a child growing up in San Fran, as a kid growing up in New York City. It takes that kind of work. You know, there's the lambda legal work, right? But it also takes, you know, we support the population that even when the laws are passed and there's so much to celebrate, it doesn't always trickle down to those that need it the most.
And to piggyback on what you just said, Naz, I think it's, you know, important to also acknowledge, you know, why young people do come to Ruth Ellis Center, and it's because it's a youth-driven space. They know it's a space that is for them. They're part of the decision-making process. We would never presume to understand their experience and decide what is best for them. Young people are the experts in their own lives.
Yep.
And it's why our mission statement is what it is, which is creating opportunities with LGBTQ plus young people to build their vision for a positive future. And that sounds vague, but it's really not. It's recognizing that every young person that comes to Ruth Ellis Center is an individual, and their experience is different based on the intersections of the social identities that make them who they are. And so meeting them where they are means that we're listening. And we're not saving, we're not helping, we're partners, we're allies, and we're going to use whatever resources we can to ensure that they can pursue a life that they're excited, proud, and hopeful for. And that's, I think, why the center has been able to reach so many young people over now more than 2 decades, because it's not because of marketing. We're horrible with marketing. People or young people learn about Ruth Ellis Center from other young people, and that's why they.
Wow, yeah, thank you so much. That's really important. I feel like both organizations, as I feel like, are clearly visibly different at this rate, but are very important in helping young LGBT people who are placed in these positions that they can't get out of and they don't know what to do in. And like, I think there's a lot of people who are similar to my age in this chat right now, and younger, who are like just on the brink of voting age and under. And I think it's really important for people around my age to be hearing this stuff and educating themselves on, you know, what's important. So Nora, at Lambda Legal, how could the issues that you work on affect youth on a day-to-day basis, would you say?
So that's a great question. And I think acknowledging that what Mark and Naz were talking about, you know, the victories that we achieve aren't, don't automatically work for our community. And so I think that's something that we struggle with constantly. And so with that limitation in mind, I think I can just talk a little bit about the work that Lambda has done. The first thing I think about is the work that we specifically do about LGBTQ youth. I've already talked a little bit about our anti-LGBTQ curriculum law cases, but there are a whole host of other issues that we work on. We have our Youth in Out of Home Care project, which, full disclosure, I don't work on directly all that often. So it's not an issue that I'm as familiar with at Lambda, but it's a project that fights to protect LGBTQ youth in child welfare and juvenile justice systems, and works to expand, the capacity of organizations to better serve and understand LGBTQ youth. We have also fought in court for the rights of trans students to have a supportive environment in school under things like Title IX, and to have access to facilities on the basis of gender identity in schools. I think that has been a major focus of our work in recent history, and trying to expand the number of courts in which trans students have the legal right to be heard, supported, and have a safe environment in school. We've also fought against the harmful practice of conversion therapy, which LGBTQ youth are often sort of the most affected by and vulnerable to. And I think there are other issues. For example, we have worked to protect LGBTQ parents and families with children, where the children themselves may or may not be LGBTQ. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had a major victory in a lawsuit against the Trump administration because they were treating LGBTQ parents differently from cis straight parents in giving citizenship to their children. And as I've mentioned before, I think something that I have been most focused on is we have been fighting, focused on in a personal, emotional sense. We have been fighting this wave of anti-trans bills in state legislatures, many of which have targeted young people, many of which haven't. There have been bills to criminalize healthcare for trans kids. There have also been bills to take away the rights of trans students in schools, in sports. And then there have been sort of a wave of other sort of miscellaneous bills, like the one that we are fighting in Idaho, that do many of those things, but also roll back protections that, or attempt to roll back protections that trans people have under state law. For example, the ability of trans people to correct the gender markers on their birth certificates. I think that those are a lot of examples of the way that the work that we do focuses on the issues that LGBTQ youth that are important to them and that they're vulnerable to. I think, like with all of our work, there is always a disconnect of, well, we can win the legal protection, and then, not to sort of continue to harp on this theme, but those protections have to be realized, and often that means doing work outside of our sort of normal comfort zone of being in court. Often it means letting, sort of letting the fight for the formal legal protection and the fight to create functional lived equality be sort of two separate things, and letting sort of that movement taking a step back, sort of, and letting other people in other communities sort of lead when it's appropriate. I think, because your question was really focused on things that affect LGBTQ youth on a daily basis. That's where my mind goes.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I just graduated high school. I had my drive-through graduation recently, which was weird. And me and a bunch of my other queer friends there noticed just in education that there isn't nearly enough inclusivity when it comes to queer kids in general, if you want to use an umbrella term. So I think that legal work is really important in education as well. yeah, I think a lot of people here will be really glad to hear that. And I don't know, it's really nice to be able to hear that things are changing and that people have been and will continue to be working for the better, because I think it's really easy to get caught up and feel really hopeless when you're just scrolling on Twitter or something as like a 17-year-old who isn't super smart. Like, you know what I mean? So Naz and Mark, how do you think we can make spaces more welcoming and inclusive to LGBTQ people, and especially Black and Brown LGBTQ people?
Well, the beautiful thing about our center is really our namesake, Ruth Ellis. Um, Ruth Ellis was an African American lesbian born 30 some odd years after the abolishment of slavery, who lived in her truth as early as 16 years old. So this is the early 1900s at this point. She was born in Springfield, Illinois, and she moved to your backyard, Chloe, into Detroit in the early 30s. And she lived with her partner, started a business. And mind you, this is before civil rights. This is in the midst of World War II. That a Black lesbian woman with her partner started a business, bought a house, and made her home a place of refuge for LGBTQ people. And so every day we try our best to follow that example by making our space welcoming and inclusive. Our space is for LGBTQ young people. It is by LGBTQ young people. There is not a decision that is made that doesn't go through the filter of the young people that we serve, as well as the many of the young people who identify as LGBTQ plus at the center. How you make a space more welcoming and inclusive? You listen. You decenter yourself and you listen. And you listen hard. And you try not to invalidate an experience that may not be your own, and understand that there is going to be a diversity within those experiences, and that each and every one of them is important. And when the time comes, and for many of the young people on this call, the time is going to come where you've got to step up. And there's a variety of ways to do it. Voting is definitely one of those things to do. Fundraising for your local LGBTQ organizations, especially those that serve Black and Brown young people. You have conversations with your loved ones, because I think what a lot of people don't understand, especially for those who have privileged identities, some of those conversations that you have around the Thanksgiving and the Christmas table could literally save a life, literally, because you're allowing for your loved ones to see someone's humanity beyond this one identity that they understand. We're all human beings. We're all deserving of love. And a lot of these spaces becoming welcoming and inclusive, especially of, for those who have experienced, structural barriers for literally hundreds of years, you listen. That's where you start. And when you're asked to do something as an ally of any identity, because even though a lot of us are a part of this community, you're not a part of every part of the community. And so we're allies to one another. We've got to listen to one another. And when someone asks you to step up and they give you ways to step up, the job and the onus is on you to take up the helm and to support those people. Because loving us should not be a revolutionary thing. It should be normal. We are human beings and we're all deserving of love. It shouldn't be a revolutionary thing to love a Black person, to love a brown person, to love an LGBTQ person. It shouldn't be revolutionary. It shouldn't start wars. That we shouldn't have to, Nora shouldn't have to fight 1,000 different cases, 1,000 different laws every day, just so we can live the lives that we're deserving to live. You know, that's what it takes. You've got to start at listening, and you've got to be there.
That's extraordinarily powerful, Naz. This is why it's so amazing to work at a space like Ruth Ellis Center, because I'm surrounded by some of the smartest people I've ever encountered. And I think to add to what Nazrina just said, it's also about representation. And I say this, obviously I am a white man, but in every department, at every level, at the Ruth Ellis Center, there are individuals who came from this community who are leading these programs. So when young people come to this space, they are seeing themselves in the leadership that run all aspects of Ruth Ellis Center. And we're extraordinarily intentional about that. And I think that we're also intentional about how employees start working at Ruth Ellis Center and the trainings that they go through, so that they're aware of the space that they take up, whether that's privilege in terms of education or race, right? It's knowing who we are and what are some of the barriers that we may have to overcome so that we can create a space for LGBTQ young people, especially LGBTQ Black and Brown young people, to feel comfortable around us. And a big part of that is, for me, acknowledging that part of my identity and creating space for others to have a voice and for them to know that at the end of the day, I'm here to do whatever it takes to ensure that they get to live the life that they want to live. And I can tell you that I've been with Ruth Ellis Center now for a decade, and it definitely took about a good year and a half before I was able to establish that level of trust with the young people. And I can tell you, it was not their responsibility to gain my trust. It was mine. It was my responsibility. I needed to acknowledge who I was in the space that I took up so that I could create a more supportive and safe space for the young people coming to the center.
Thank you both so much. That's really important. I feel like a lot of people during these times, especially around me, I've noticed, because I live in a pretty predominantly white and suburban area. I think people need to definitely take a step back and realize that we need to amplify and center the Black and Brown voices that are the subject of conversation to begin with. So I think that representation and inclusivity and that support is so important, and it really makes me happy that both of your organizations fight for that in different ways. So now is the supposed time when I'm supposed to go through the Q&A chat box. So there's a bunch of questions here. I'm gonna look through some of them and see if I can pick out one that is maybe relevant. Okay. So, this one, I feel like I hear this a lot from a lot of different people, and anyone I think could answer this, but someone named Charlotte they said that they had a huge heated debate with their grandma or whatever, and 60 years of racism probably won't right themselves in a few conversations, is what she said. So how do you think that people can host conversations, productive conversations with people like that in order to come to some sort of peace, do you think? If anyone has something to say on that. I don't want to direct it to someone in specific, but
I'll start because Naz was just giving me the look.
I saw it a little.
Yeah, that's the signal to say, Mark, you go first. Never diminish your power. Know that one conversation can lead to many, many more. So the moment we allow ourselves to take risks and sometimes put ourselves in uncomfortable positions, know that the people around us are going to be aware of that. And they're going to know that you're stepping up and that you're challenging them to think differently. You know, one of the things that we talk about at Ruth Ellis Center a lot is this idea, and actually I should, Naz and what she calls the coven. There's a whole group of women at Ruth Ellis Center who are extraordinarily powerful, but they talk about this idea of radical honesty. And I love that term because this is the time for radical honesty. We should be uncomfortable talking about these things. But it doesn't mean that we need to demonize folks. I think one of the reasons why Ruth Ellis Center has been successful working within major systems and working with families who are really struggling with their child's identity is that we're not in it to demonize people. We're in it so that we can maybe offer a different perspective. And when we do that, I promise you that you'll start to see some movement. And it may not happen overnight, but inch by inch, foot by foot, mile by mile, change will happen. But we need to be consistent, and we need to be persistent, and we need to be compassionate at the same time, because it doesn't, you're right, we're not going to change the way somebody has been taught to believe in an instant. But I believe that this fight is worth the long haul. It is a marathon. It is not a race. But we all have to make that commitment so that our world gets to be more equitable. Naz, what would you add to that?
It can be hard to believe because obviously in this world there are some people who are truly hateful. But for a lot of other people, it's really fear of the unknown. We live in a world, in a beautiful world in some ways, where a lot of our young people, especially like, you know, the newer generation, I am a millennial myself, the Zoomers, and even some Zoomers are parents now, so the generations that they're giving birth to, who are radically honest about who they are. And speaking to consistency, sometimes it's, you know, understanding you're going to have family members and other loved ones who say something that you might deem problematic. And being a good ally on some days means hopping right on top of it. Like, I have time today. Know that what you are stating is problematic and is incredibly hurtful and often violent for the people that you're harming by speaking this way about them. And you've got to be consistent about it. Being a good ally means every time someone says something, knowing you've got to step up and say something. Because every now and then it'll get to a point where, oh my God, Chloe's going to tell me, you know, this, that, and the third. And Chloe's going to step up and be like, yeah, that's right. I care about this population. And so you're going to have to hear it again until they understand that this isn't acceptable. It's not acceptable to dehumanize people, to take away their dignity. But there's a consistency that's necessary. And even though it doesn't seem like a huge gesture, like I said before, some of these, you know, these conversations that are born out of, you know, snide comments can literally save people's lives, impact the way they vote, change how they see maybe one of your best friends, change how they see one of your relatives, change how they view the world. But it takes that consistency and really often bravery to consistently be okay with saying, I have time and I am going to engage with you and I am going to continue to tell you that this is inappropriate until you stop this behavior. And some people might never, and understand that they might never. But no one can ever come to you and say that you didn't advocate enough because you were consistent.
I am certainly not an expert in this, and I think it would be hard for me to add anything to the incredible advice that's been given. I definitely agree that like not being afraid to sit in an uncomfortable situation and conversation is so important, because it can be so easy to just constantly decide, consistently every time, decide to opt out of the conversation because you don't want to raise an issue, or you don't want to make things uncomfortable, your relationship with a loved one. I think one experience that I've had in arguing with people, not even necessarily family, but just socially, is that I often have to make it a point to sort of step out of the way that I've been trained as a lawyer, which is an inherently rooted in the legal system, is not, being used to sort of like, well, if we just have the best argument, then we'll win. That doesn't necessarily work with trying to change the way that people think, especially when the way that they're thinking is inherently not based on logic, and is so rooted in how they see themselves and how they feel connected to other people. So I think having to get out of that has been really important. I think one piece of advice that I have for people, especially for queer youth who are talking to their family, is that you really have to try to pay attention to what role shame is playing in the way that you're dealing with your parents, because I think or your loved ones, whoever is taking care of you, because I think that is a really powerful, it motivates a lot of your decision making often, and I think you have to sort of look out for the way that it's influencing the things you decide to do and say.
Thank you guys so much. Wow. Thank you so much for all of your thorough answers. There are a lot of questions here, and there's a lot of things to cover, and that sort of question especially is really difficult to answer, at least I would think, because I know a lot of kids like me are surrounded by a lot of people who are very closed-minded or have grown up to think a very certain way that could be outrageous to people raised in different areas. So yeah, thank you guys so much for that answer. There's another person, this is a little more of a general question, but Jacob says, how can one have hope for the future regarding race and sexuality when everything seems so dark and like it's never going to get better? I really try to, and I know things are going to get better, but sometimes it just feels hopeless.
And you said that person's name was Jacob?
Yes.
This conversation is evidence to me that there's hope. Chloe, you decided that you wanted to amplify a certain community. This is hope. All of the participants who are a part of this conversation, the panelists and the 180 people and the 126 questions, that's hope. We're here. In this space where we're here. I mean, I would like to believe that everyone's participating, of course, out of love for Chloe, but also for this platform that you've decided to share. This is hope, that there are young people sitting in this conversation knowing that every day there's Noras in the world who are fighting really hard to make sure from a legal standpoint you get to live the life that you want to live. That there are Marks in the world who will sit in the office until midnight some nights to make sure that any young person that walks into our doors feels safe and supported and knows that there's someone there and present who's going to listen to them and be there for them. This is hope. All of this, I want for people to recognize your very being, the very fact that you are out in the world and you are proud to say, I am gay, I am bi, I am trans, I am pan, I'm an ace, all of those things. The fact that you are proud to be who you are and you're unafraid to share it, there's always hope. as long as we continue to exist, as long as we continue to fight, as long as we continue to support one another, there's always hope, always. And the fact that all the young people and the people that love those young people in this conversation right now, this is hope. This is how you know that even though there's more work to be done, so many people have come before us to get to this point. The fact that Nora is doing the work that she's doing. I mean, 50 years ago, would that have even been a thing? I mean, for me, like, you know, as a person who identifies as Black and man and Latinx, like living and loving in a state, in a place that's not home, there's hope.
Super powerful, Nazrina. I was thinking about what that young person, sort of the very first Ruth Ellis Center young person, what he must have been thinking at that time. You know, he'd been kicked out of his house, violently kicked out of his house, and couldn't find any resources in Detroit 21 years ago that were specific to Black, queer, young people experiencing homelessness and family rejection, right? It didn't exist. But because in that moment, he had just a glimpse of hope that there could potentially be something, he reached out to a couple of community leaders who said, we have to do something, we have to do better. And they organized this group of 20 individuals who brainstormed this idea over a weekend. And this idea was the Ruth Ellis Center. And now, I mean, we've supported tens of thousands of young people over the last 2 decades, all because that one young person, for that one moment, had hope.
That's our literal origin story.
I think that story, which I hadn't heard before, it gives me a lot of hope right now. I think to echo, Naz, what you were saying earlier, I think, you know, the generation of kids that are coming into activism and politics and public and social life right now give me so much hope for the future. I think it's just been incredible to see, and the way that they're really challenging sometimes even just their parents. I mean, I don't know, I was reading something the other day about some candidate for, I think, state senate somewhere, who just had all these horrible views, and his younger daughter, teenage daughter, was on Twitter like, don't vote for my dad, or something like that. I mean, and that sort of story that you sort of hear now over and over again, which I think is incredible. I think a lot about the messages that popular culture is sending now, and just the ideas about queer people and trans people that are being transmitted to us. Like, I always think about, I was born in the early 90s, and certainly for my generation, things were a lot better than the generation that came before me. You know, my ancestors, as a trans person, I certainly didn't have it as hard as they did. But I think one thing that has always stuck with me is the movie. There was a movie that came out when I was like maybe 12 or 13, or probably younger. I don't even remember at this point. But it was a Jim Carrey movie, and sort of everyone that I went to school with loved it. And the whole punchline of the movie is, at the end, the villain is sort of revealed to be a trans woman, and everybody proceeds to basically beat her up, and then a room full of people vomit. And that's not a message that's being sent to kids anymore. Like, that stigma and that shame is not being transmitted anymore. So I think that is a huge sign of progress.
Thank you so much. That's really powerful. Thank you all so much for sharing. That's incredible. I definitely think it's really important to keep hope alive, and to realize that there are so many young people who who don't even have all of the tools yet, who haven't even educated themselves fully enough yet to like fully use their potential to fight for the greater good, that they will soon be able to as they get older. Like I'm only 17. A bunch of these other kids are only like 15, 16, 17, like, but we all want change, and it's evident that a lot of people want change, and I think that's a really important thing. So thank you guys so much for speaking about this. I appreciate it so much. I think now is the time that I'm supposed to be playing some songs for these kids, if that's okay with y'all. I don't know how to correctly transition into like, all right, time for me to play my songs now. Like, I don't know. I don't want to make this a promotion for my music, but I am going to be playing a couple songs for y'all as like a wrap up sort of thing. But is there anything any of you would like to say before then? Anything at all? I want to give one
Thank you
last.
so much. That's all.
Yes. Okay, cool.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chloe. It's awesome to be able to have this conversation with you and with so many young people around the world. And just know that there are spaces where you get to be you. And there are people who have dedicated their entire lives to find ways to access the kind of resources that you're seeking. So, if there's questions about, what's happening at Ruth Ellis Center, check us out on Facebook or Insta or Twitter. If you have questions, Naz and I handle a lot of the social media, so you'll probably get in direct contact with us. We're happy to answer any questions you may have.
And Chloe, I just so appreciate you. This is incredible. I don't know that when I was 17, that I would have been this brave and understand and be able to decenter myself and really embrace a movement that I am an ally to and that I'm a part of. And so, I mean, really hats off to you and all of your amazing supporters and the people that support you for doing this, because what you may not realize is this is the work. So just like Nora's doing the work and Mark and I are doing the work, like you're also doing the work, and you are incredible.
Thank you so much.
And
No,
it's
you.
nice to
Oh my
see
God.
somebody from the mitten doing the work,
Yeah, right here.
Yes.
I'm trying my best. I want to do everything I can to grow and improve every day and work toward the movement in any way that I can, I guess. And I think that's what's most important, is having the intent to grow and to keep working steadily, whether that be like in educating other people, in donating money, in protesting, in like anything that you can do, I think is so important right now. And I really appreciate you guys being here. Thank you so much. So I'm gonna play Manta Rays now. I have a little guitar with me. I'm literally in my bedroom right now. So I'm gonna give you like a little tiny performance of Manta Rays real quick. Ugh. It feels really weird just playing in my room without an audience that's like in front of me, but it's fine. Okay. I'm trying to dream of you for so long, I can't even remember when I first decided your face was the one I wanted my mind to conjure. I never knew manta rays were so big till I got high and had to Google it. I'm not obsessed, the feeling's just there, and I'm trying hard to forget you. Trying hard to forget you. Your honey voice echoes in every noise, and I know this is just how it goes. I know. My therapist will tell me that it's best to let it be, but I wanna like fight fires. I wanna explode, I wanna be everything you want to know. It's all for you, it's all for you, it's all for you, it's always for you, it's all for you, it's never not for you, it's all for you, it's always for you. I wanna be your shiny pearl, your one in the world, the type you really are. Wish I were something silly, could I? I skip every song, I won't remind me of you, 'cause if it dies and it's not worth the time, I wish I had more time with you. And I wanna be your everything, wanna be more than what I am in general. Don't tell me that this means anything. I promise I understand, but it's all for you, it's all for you, it's all for you, it's always for you, it's all for you, it's never not for you, it's all for you, it's always for you. That was Manta Rays. Thank you. I love the silent applause. I appreciate it so much. Okay. So I was gonna play another song, but I feel like that kind of wraps everything up, and I feel really good right now. I'm very thankful to have y'all here. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming to the Zoom meetup. And a special thank you to Lambda Legal and Ruth Ellis Center and Ally Coalition for facilitating this. Thank you, Nora, Mark, and Nazarena for breaking down these issues for us and for providing us with resources, because we're children and we need to learn and support campaigns, because knowledge is power. So I would heavily encourage y'all to register to vote when you turn 18, at a link that we have, which is headcount.org/Chloe, which I think is really sick, because I don't know how the hell to register to vote yet, so I'm gonna use that. So thank you guys so much again for joining me. I appreciate you so much. Thank you. Okay, cool. All right, I'll see y'all later. Goodbye, everyone.